Welcome to the No More Sex Shame video series. We are talking about ways in which people have experienced sexual shaming across their lives, and specifically ways that they have overcome those experiences. Today we have Dan Savage sharing with us some of the experiences that he has, seeing and hearing about people's sex shaming experiences across the country. Dan, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having me, David. And congratulations on the new project. And I think it's genius. I'm glad
Thanks.
you include me.
I'm excited about it. It's a chance to start to empower people to overcome some of these negative experiences. I'd love to hear you just kind of share with viewers how you see this. I mean, do you see sexual shaming as continuing to be a significant issue?
I do, and I see it a lot in my work. I hear mostly the idea behind Savage Love was going to be a sex advice column by a gay guy for straight people. And initially it was a joke, and I was going to treat straight people and straight readers with the same contempt that heterosexual advice columnists had then always treated gay readers and gay questions with. Like, ew, gross, your mother must be so sad, but here's some advice. That's kind of the attitude you would get from Ann Landers when I was a kid growing up. She got better in her old age, but when I was like 12 and reading advice columns, they weren't very gay positive. That said, most of the letters I've gotten over the years, I'd say the vast majority are people struggling with issues of shame. And usually, and I make this distinction, people who are gay and out and over it and reconciled to their sexuality and they've incorporated it into their lives and they're out to their friends and families and they're in a good place, maybe struggling with the after effects of shame, but they're usually not in the grip of it. Because it's hard to be gay and out and in the grip of shame, because shame is what keeps you gay and closeted. Shame is what makes you Ted Haggard, and you've had to battle that demon, at least to a standstill, if not defeated it, to be gay and out. But what I get from straight people is often they're stuck with the sexual shame because they are kinky, because they are non-monogamous, because they have quote-unquote non-normative sexual desires, because they're freaks, or, they're not satisfied by what they were told should be all you would ever want, all a normal and good person would ever want. And they arrive at adulthood wanting different things or more, and they are stuck. And I've always joked that, if you're gay, the hard thing is looking your mother in the eye and telling her you're a cocksucker when you're a teenager. Then looking your boyfriend in the eye and telling him you want to get tied up or peed on or whatever else it is that you want to do, or being honest that with your friends that your relationship's not monogamous, or being honest with your friends that you've done sex work. All of that, compared to coming out to your parents in the first place, is not scary, is comparatively easy. And so gay people, queer people, have done this really difficult thing just so they can be queer people. I'm not saying there aren't queer people who are paralyzed by or stuck with shame, but they're usually not out and queer. And if they're out and queer, they may be sort of unpacking the remnants of it, but they're not in the grip of it. And straight people are often really in the grip of it. And it is a very odd job for a gay guy to do, to spend most of his days going to straight people. It's okay. It'll be fine. Do that. If you incorporated it, I do think that there's things we can do that we shouldn't be ashamed of. If you're harming people, if you're using people, if you're not being honest with people,
if you're grabbing people's genitals without consent.
Right. There's definitely things that, and ways that you can behave while you do what you want or get what you want, that themselves are things you shouldn't be proud of and things you should be ashamed of. But the thing itself, if you can find a way to enjoy it, incorporate it into your life in a healthy way, a consensual way, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and you should embrace it. So most of the shame I deal with all day long is that. And I, as a gay guy, I feel, I shame as a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 11, 12, 13, as I realized that I was gay, even before that, because I was, kind of a sissy boy and a mama's boy, kind of a cliche of what a gay kid is. And, I was bullied for that. I was shamed for that. I could tell my family was embarrassed by me. I wasn't a boy like my brothers were boys. And, I had to process that and deal with it. And that was hard. And then when I realized I was gay, that was awful, especially because I was like, and this was pre-Glee, right? And pre-internet. And the best thing that I could find out there to read about homosexuality was it Dr. David Rubenstein's Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Sex But Was Afraid to Ask, which is just so packed full of bullshit and misinformation yanked from his ass that there should be an annual holiday where we, I don't want to say burn the book, because I'm against book burning, but we reread the book and unpack what was so fucking harmful and disgusting about the lies that he told in there about queer people. That was the best that I could get, and that reinforced my shame, and I had to hack through that. And then when I first came out, I got shamed, but I got shamed for a reason that I don't like to talk about, because it actually, you know, makes me sound sex negative, and it makes the kind of shaming I went through sound like heroic on my part, because I resisted the pull, or, you know, I was saying no to sex and shamed for that. Because when I first came out, like, all my friends, you know, my first boyfriend was like, here's how you have sex in the bushes, here's how you go to the bathhouses, and I was like, no, thank you, because I'm squeamish. I don't want to share a can of Coke with my sister. I'm not going to suck a dick that's been in 10 other miles in the last half hour. It's just not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God it wasn't my thing, because if I had been doing that in Chicago when I first came out in the very early 80s, I might not be here having this conversation with you now. But I was shamed for it. They called me Sister Dan, and they called me a nun, and they, you know, I would go to the dirty bookstore when the bars closed with my friends who would want to go to the dirty bookstores when the bars closed if they didn't have anyone to go home with, and I would wait at the front and talk to a guy at the counter, because I wasn't going to go in the back and suck a dick in the dark. Not that I think that there's anything wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, they were my friends. I went there with them, and they were doing it, and I didn't say that they were doing anything wrong. I was just telling them that I couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it. But I was told that I was a bad gay man. I wasn't. I needed to get with the program, and I needed to let go of the shame. I was literally shamed for what was perceived by my friends to be sort of a sex negativity. Not that that buzzword was floating around then. I was shamed by them for what they perceived to be the shame that was preventing me from behaving exactly as they were behaving.
Isn't that fascinating that people who've been sexually shamed and overcome it sometimes then end up, you know, dumping new kinds of shame on other people for not being sex positive enough?
They embrace what they think is a new norm and then want to enforce it, sometimes with the same tools that the old norm they rejected was enforced with.
Oh, that's well said.
And you have to be on guard for that. Sometimes, you know, Terry and I'm married for a very long time. We're not monogamous, and we've been very open about that, much to the consternation when we first told people we weren't monogamous publicly, of like gay marriage organizations and gay parenting groups. But sometimes I hear from people who are poly activists or non-monogamous, and what they're saying is that people who are monogamous are doing it wrong, that polyamory or non-monogamy is the only good or smart way to go to structure a relationship. And then I hear from people who are monogamous or want to have monogamous relationships, who have a lot of poly friends, who live in a city like San Francisco or Portland or Seattle, who feel like they're doing it wrong, that they feel that they feel inadequate in some way because they're so, you know, there must be something deficient or unenlightened about them, because they want this thing that their friends or their community has rejected, and they're being shamed for doing what the shamers of their poly friends had to like fight back against to come out as poly, and now they're being shamed by their poly friends for not also being poly. So you always have to be careful not to become the thing that fucked your life up or made you feel
Yeah. Yeah, we always, you know, have that risk of growing up to be our parents, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, using the same tools that were used against you to create, you know, a little bubble where, you know, some people don't feel secure in who they are unless they've created a world for themselves where what and who they are is normative in that world. Mm-hmm. And so they begin to enforce that norm. And that's what I went through when I was, you know, 16, 17, 18 years old, and hanging out with guys who were my age or a little bit older, but more in the grips of kind of like 1970s style gay life and what that meant to be a gay man. And that was being imparted to me, and it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what every gay man in the 1970s wanted either, but it wasn't what I wanted. But it was, you know, my friends treated me like I was shaming them by not participating, and then they shamed me for not participating because they felt shamed by my like waiting. I'm like, I'm not shaming you. I don't care. Go suck a dick. I'll wait right here, and then we can go to the Golden Grill Pancake House that's open until 24 hours and have some waffles and bacon after you suck a dick.
It sounds like you're saying that, you know, the best way to overcome that history of sexual shaming is, number one, to kind of come out about these desires that you were shamed for having and to embrace and own them. But it almost sounds like you're saying that there's sort of a second thing, which is to be mindful that you don't recreate that past and start dumping your shame on other people.
Exactly. That you don't become that which, harmed you. Don't turn around and be the, I guess, the counter reaction you don't want to see in the world. To twist
Yeah, because then everything just swings back and forth. We're shaming these people, they're shaming us.
And you do see that you see that in communities where you'd think people had hopefully given a little more thought to these dynamics. You see gay men saying that the bi guy they know aren't really bi because they said they were bi when they first came out, and they'll shame literally the bi guys who are, uh, many or most of them actually bi guys. Maybe some of them are guy. It's a true thing that some guys who are gay come out as bi first. Maybe that's where they're at right now, and you like mowing them about it isn't going to make them feel safe to come out to you. So it's kind of useless. But you also see that, I think, sometimes with poly and kink communities. Not that I'm here to shame the poly, kink, queer, gay communities. We are the victims of shame. But some of what I see in the letters and the mail I get is people who are being shamed by people who overcame the people who shamed them.
Yeah, that cycle of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this, at least I hope these conversations are a way to start interrupting that. I mean, interrupting that cycle. One of the things that I keep hearing, from folks as I'm doing these interviews is different ways that shame is out there, in ways I didn't anticipate. I mean, I'm learning so much hearing these stories from people who are experiencing sexual shame that I wouldn't have predicted.
Mm-hmm.
And even, you bringing this one up, I was aware of that shaming when I wrote my first book about the cuckolds. One of the things I heard was these, heterosexual cuckold couples who had to keep their cuckolding secret from their swinger friends because the swingers would shame them. Where if the guy wasn't getting the sex, that there's something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's too bad. It's a fine line to walk, though, I think, sometimes with kink, because sometimes, with cuckolds, for example, the shame or mortification or humiliation is part of what fuels the kink, part of what is the turn on. So there are times where people have found a way to turn that, the straw of shame into the gold of boners and orgasms for everybody. So do we want to eradicate every last scrap of it? Are we going to have a less varied and interesting sort of sexual geography out there in the world? Fewer peaks and valleys if we completely eradicate all shame? Because shame does seem to create, for some folks, kinks and pleasures later in life that they're able to really accept and embrace and that enrich their lives in very meaningful ways. So I look back at some of the shaming I was subjected to, or other gay men that I know were subjected to. And, once you're over it, once you've embraced it, once you've come through it, some of the repercussions, some of the ripples in the pond are actually interesting. It's kind of hot. I mean, the cliche is, how many gay men do I know who want to be called faggot when they're getting fucked? And it's a very high percentage. This word that had such powerful shaming effects when you were 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, that felt so toxic and damaging, later in life becomes this word that just like gets your blood flowing literally to the right places and this adrenaline. So not to like complicate your narrative or the goals of the project, but what happens if we do eliminate all shame, if no one experiences it or is subjected to it? What happens to the people selling bondage gear then?
or cages.
Yeah, like a lot of bondage seems to be fueled by people who want to, this desire to have these things happen to you without having to take any personal responsibility for them because you're helpless. And so if you eradicate that all shame, I think of my friends at the Mr. S leather shop in San Francisco going out of business because no one needs to be tied up anymore when they fuck.
Yeah, I did an interview actually I did a large talk in the porn space above Mr. S leather space one time. 300 folks in leather there to hear me talk about sex addiction. It was a wild kind of experience.
I love that space. I have pictures of me in that space that I can share with you.
Yeah, I don't know if you know Reed Mihalko. Reed.
Sorry?
Yeah, do you know Reed Mihalko?
Mm-hmm.
So Reed, did did an interview for us, and he kind of spoke to what you're talking about, which he said that, he at this point in his kind of development uses his shame as a compass to find those kinds of things find the things on his bucket list, to find those places that he hasn't touched yet, those experiences he hasn't had, and those places that he still kind of fears. And I think that is more my kind of goal as an existential kind of therapist, wanting people to be self-aware, to understand themselves. And I think understanding our experiences of sexual shame and how we overcame them then gives us more power, more tools to not replicate that.
But I do want to support, with having just had that little speech about not eradicating all shame, because sometimes it's interesting. Some people kill themselves because of the shame they're subjected to. And I would rather live in a culture where no one died or harmed themselves because they were reeling from the shaming and scolding. I think of, John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed on the Internet. I think I'm getting the title right. He unpacks the story of the Formula One race car president, Moxley, I think his name is, who was outed by a tabloid in the UK for having a kinky sex party, for paying hookers and going to a dungeon, and dungeons and hookers and that kind of sex work is legal in the UK. And video or photograph surfaced, and he was publicly shamed for it. And he sued the paper and won, and kind of won in the court of public opinion too, which no one expected. And he says in John Ronson's book, I won because I refused to be ashamed, that I embraced it and said, yes, I'm kinky. Many people are into these kinds of kinks. It's why there's dungeons and for-profit dungeons. It's why people can make a career of providing people with these experiences. And I have nothing to be ashamed of. And there's nothing about him refusing to be shamed, and seemingly, when you read the interviews with him, not experiencing any shame about his desires that made his desires any less powerful for him, or his pleasures any less intense for him.
So there again, it's that coming out narrative, that owning these desires and experiences. And I think, again, what's changing in society is that other folks are now recognizing, hey, that court of public opinion is kind of changing, where more folks are saying, hey, I've been shamed for these desires. I might not share yours, but it's not right for you to experience those feelings the same way it wasn't right for me to experience the shame. And now, it used to be everybody would just kind of be quiet about their kink or about their porn watching or about this or that or the other thing. And they would just, go into silence as that person was dragged away, into the shame jail.
Yeah. I want to ask you though, is it okay to keep some things private? So one pleasure that sometimes people experience with their public persona versus their sexual persona is that disconnect. Like how they're perceived publicly is different than sometimes who they are erotically or sexually. Powerful women who in bed enjoy, being called a slut and having their hair pulled and their ass slapped. Gay men who are righteous and LGBT rights table pounders who want to be called faggot when they're getting fucked. There's lots of examples of that disconnect. And does everyone need to disclose? Does everyone need to come out of those closets around being cuckolds or kinksters? Or are people able to, keep some things private without having to read into that desire to keep X private any shame about X? Because I don't think that that's necessarily true, that somebody who keeps something about their private persona or their sexual persona or their sexual activities to themselves, in some instances, to keep it powerful and evocative, is letting down the side or is paralyzed by shame. Because that dynamic, who we are when we're fully clothed and moving through the world and presenting our public face, and then who we are when we're in bed and making ourselves vulnerable. If we entirely break down that wall, if we take that apart brick by brick, are we harming our erotics in a way?
I think it's the difference between, as you said, kind of privacy versus secrecy, and the secrecy driven by fear of rejection and fear of shaming. I also have to wonder, isn't there a generational shift happening around these issues? We have these teenagers who, like my daughter, doing these YouTube diaries talking about all these personal kinds of private issues that would be private to me, but are not to them. And I wonder what it'll look like in 20 years.
Yeah, I think of all the kids on Tumblr who are unpacking their kinks and creating these communities of sort of open kink, this open kink discourse among young people. Sometimes I dive in and take a look just for strictly professional reasons.
Absolutely. And I read this neat article the other day about the Rinsta versus the Finsta kind of within Tumblr. You don't, oh my God,
What is Rinsta?
Rinsta is your real Instagram. Okay, so it's Instagram, not Tumblr, but it's your real Instagram account. And then Finsta is your fake Instagram account. And the Rinsta is where you share stuff that your teachers and friends and family could hear. The Finsta is where you share stuff that's not socially appropriate,
Mm.
that you're working through publicly. And again, I think that's these neat sea changes that are happening around public, private, personal, secret,
Mm.
where people are working through these things in neat new ways.
Yeah, I completely support that. Although I do have a friend right now that I know what to call it, who just pulled down his Finsta account because there was some overlap and bleeding because somebody was trying to out him on his
Mm-hmm.
Insta for his Finsta. Um, so there are malicious people floating around out there who will attempt to shame people who want to keep things in those two separate piles. And yeah,
And use that, yeah, and use that power and experience of shame that people will have as a way to harm them and force them to engage in, extortion.
and then the Mosley guy in the John Ronson's book literally paints the way. He says, "Refuse to be ashamed, and it loses its power." It's a club people can beat you with that's imaginary in a way, and if you refuse to play along, the club doesn't exist.
That's fabulous. I'd like to end there. That's wonderful, Dan. Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you, David. It was really great talking with you.
Awesome.